The host wanted to turn Stallone into an example, but instead, he became the ultimate proof of why people have stopped trusting mainstream media. The studio lights were glaring, almost too bright, the kind that made people sweat, even when they weren't nervous. But Sylvester Stallone? He wasn't nervous at all. Sitting back in his chair, legs apart, shoulders relaxed, just waiting. The audience murmured in anticipation, some already gripping their phones, fingers hovering over record buttons. They could feel it, something was about to go down. Across from him sat Ethan Caldwell, a well-groomed, sharp-dressed TV host, famous for his progressive angle and love of gotcha moments. A smirk crept onto his face as he leaned forward. He had taken down politicians, activists, and Hollywood elites, always managing to make them trip over their own words. But Stallone? That was new territory. Ethan started, his voice smooth, carefully rehearsed. Mr. Stallone, you've always been seen as a symbol of American toughness. But don't you think that kind of masculinity is outdated? In today's world, shouldn't we be redefining strength, making it more inclusive? A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Ethan's fans, the ones who lived for his clever traps. Stallone blinked, slowly and deliberately. Then, leaning in, elbows resting on his knees, he exhaled through his nose. So, you're asking if I think being tough is a bad thing now? Ethan smirked, ready to pounce. Well, don't you think we've moved past the era where men have to punch their way through problems? Hasn't the world outgrown that outdated mindset? Silence. The kind that makes people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Stallone scratched his chin, then let out a laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a deep, genuine belly laugh. You're serious? He said, shaking his head. You really think toughness is a problem? Ethan adjusted his tie. I think it can be when it discourages vulnerability. Stallone nodded slowly, like he was mulling it over. Then, leaning back and stretching his arms across the chair, he asked, let me ask you something. If someone breaks into your house tonight, do you want a tough guy in there? Or do you want someone who's going to sit down and have a conversation about their feelings? A few gasps. A few claps. Ethan opened his mouth, but Stallone wasn't done. Toughness ain't about punching walls or yelling the loudest, Stallone continued. It's about standing firm when life knocks you down. It's about protecting your family. It's about discipline, respect, and hard work. And if you think the world doesn't need that anymore, he shook his head. Then I don't know what world you're living in, man. Ethan forced a chuckle, but something flashed in his eyes. Hesitation. He hadn't expected Stallone to hit back this fast. But he wasn't about to give up. All right, Ethan said, shifting in his seat. But let's be honest. Hollywood, including your own movies, has glorified violence as the solution to problems. Isn't that part of the issue? Stallone didn't hesitate. Hollywood glorifies a lot of things. You ever seen a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork? Laughter. Real laughter. Even some of Ethan's crew smirked. But Ethan still had more tricks up his sleeve. The problem? Stallone was just getting started. Ethan straightened his posture, flipping through his cue cards, searching for the perfect counter. He was good at this, leading his guests down a path where they had to stumble. But Stallone? He wasn't playing along. Let's talk about influence, Ethan said, locking eyes with him. You've built a career playing no-nonsense, tough guy characters. Men who solve problems with their fists, guns, or brute force. Do you ever think about the message that sends? Don't you feel a responsibility to promote, let's say, a more progressive kind of hero? The way Ethan emphasized progressive made it clear where this was headed. Stallone smirked, cracking his knuckles like a boxer warming up. First of all, he said, voice steady, I make movies. Movies ain't real, you know that, right? He raised an eyebrow. Last I checked, I never actually went 15 rounds with Apollo Creed. Never took down an entire army with a red bandana and a knife. Never ran up those steps in Philly and magically solved everyone's problems. More laughter. But Ethan stood firm. Sure, but movies shape culture. Kids grew up watching Rambo and Rocky. Shouldn't we be giving them heroes who solve problems without violence? Stallone exhaled sharply through his nose. Man, you ever seen Rocky? He shook his head. That whole movie was about getting back up when life knocks you down. It wasn't about beating people up, it was about heart, perseverance. And Rambo. He shrugged. That guy just wanted to be left alone. If people had let him walk through town in peace, none of that would have happened. Louder applause this time. Ethan clenched his jaw. He could feel the momentum slipping. So he leaned in, speaking softer, more personal. Okay, fair enough, he said. But let's talk about real life. America is at a point where people are questioning what it means to be a man, what it means to be tough. And some would argue that your old-school mindset, this never-show-weakness approach, is part of the problem. That it causes division instead of unity.
What do you say to that?
Stallone let the question hang. Then, tapping his fingers on the armrest, he locked eyes with Ethan. You ever met a firefighter? He asked. Ethan blinked. Excuse me? A firefighter. A cop. A guy in the military. Hell, even a single mom working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. You ever talk to those people? Stallone shook his head. You think toughness is their problem? Silence. No, man, Stallone continued. Their toughness is what keeps the world running. The real problem isn't strength, it's people acting like strength is bad. Like it's dangerous. Weakness ain't a virtue, pal. Strength with control? That's what keeps people safe. From the back of the room, someone let out a low whistle. The energy had shifted. Ethan straightened, gripping his cue cards, scrambling for control. But before he could speak, Stallone raised a hand. Not aggressively, just enough to signal he wasn't finished. You want to know the real problem? He asked, leaning in. It's not toughness. It's people who act like toughness is the enemy, while living in a world built and protected by tough people. The room went silent. Ethan swallowed. He had another question ready, another attempt to steer things back. But the audience? They weren't nodding with him anymore. They were waiting for Stallone's next words. And Stallone? He wasn't done yet.